Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Chuck Heron. Chuck is the CTO over at WID. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for being here, Chuck. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
A little bit. I'll try to keep it brief. My company is young, but I am not. So I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 20 years. Started back in the late 90s, early 2000s as an attacker, as a penetration tester. And then moved to the blue team in about 2004 and served as CISO for a few different organizations over the next 18 years. AIG, everything consumer facing, Texas Capital Bank, and so forth. Joined WIB about 2 years ago to bring to the market a solution that I didn't see in the market and it didn't exist. And that is an API security platform. So I've been an attacker, I've been a defender, and now I've moved into being a builder. And it's been a heck of a fun time the whole way.
Very cool. Have you noticed that there's any differences in hiring among all the different areas that you've been a part of in the industry?
I have. And I think that I've been around so long. When I started in cybersecurity, when I started in technology, cybersecurity was barely even a discipline. The first CISO really came around in the mid to late 90s. That wasn't really even a title. When I graduated from college, there wasn't even a computer security course, much less a degree in it. So the hiring landscape in the entire industry has changed quite a bit over the last 20 years. And it still is an interesting space in that we have almost unlimited demand, and it's very difficult for people to break in. You would think that it would be easier to get a job in cybersecurity given how much demand there is, but that is still not the case today.
Yeah, I think basically we have a massive talent pipeline problem, succession planning problem, and it presents in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, I think we just need more entry-level jobs. Obviously, we talk about the talent gap a lot on the show. How would you qualify the idea of the talent gap? Do you see it as a real thing? And if so, where does it exist? Because it sounds like in your mind, it probably doesn't exist at the entry level.
I think it does. I think it's a real problem, and I don't remember the exact stat, but I remember seeing a stat not too long ago about the number of unfilled CISSP jobs just in the U.S. versus the number of CISSPs that exist in the world. And when you have a 10x type issue like that, I think it was something like 800,000 unfilled jobs, and there's 80,000 CISSPs or something like that. I mean, I got my CISSP back in 2001, 2002, number 34,758. And there's there's 5 million of us out there, and especially those of us who've been doing it for a long time. So I think there are different talent problems depending on the type of roles within cybersecurity that you're trying to hire, but definitely there's more demand than supply. And so a lot of young people or people looking to make career changes are struggling with, well, what are the skills? What are the things that I need to do to demonstrate that I can break into this space and take one of these jobs? And they're kind of feeling boxed out. So it's on the other end, on the 20-year veteran end, when you look at the average length of a CISO, duration of a CISO's tenure is somewhere around 18 months. And you see new issues coming up with like SolarWinds case recently with CISOs facing legal liability and prosecution for certain things. There aren't a lot of people that necessarily even want those jobs anymore. There's so much baggage. If you're a 20-year technology veteran, you really have to ask yourself, why do I want a CISO job right now? It sounds really good when you're coming up through the ranks, but when you get into the amount of liability and how difficult the jobs are, and the stress levels and the burnout and the challenges, it's a really, really tough gig. And I think the problem there is you have qualified candidates that don't want the jobs. So at the lower end of the spectrum, you've got unqualified candidates, and I say that only because of their background. It doesn't speak to their abilities, but people that don't have the skills and experience that the hiring managers were looking for. And we'll talk about sort of why that is in a few minutes. But on the top end of the space, there are a lot of very senior roles that companies are having a big problem filling. And that's because the people that they want that have been doing it for 20 years don't want that job. Nobody wants to sign up for a death march. Nobody wants to sign up to be your next fall guy. And I think companies are starting to run into that, especially as regulations change and make the job even harder and assign even more accountability without the corresponding authority to get things done in the companies that those executives need to happen. So you have folks like me and others that are going into other things. They'll be a VC, they'll serve on boards, they'll have be a virtual CISO where I don't have the liability if you don't follow my advice, things like that. I think we're seeing a lot of interesting change in the space that's driven by some of those factors that just exacerbates things.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's a couple of threads that we could pull on there. We could talk about the solutions to the entry level hiring problem, and at some point, maybe, how do we solve the issue of continuing to build a pipeline for CISOs as well, being that it's becoming more and more challenging. So I guess let's kind of start with the entry level, being that it's, I think, work our way up to CISO. Any thoughts or, I guess, case studies from your experience on how we can build a business case to build our own candidates out there versus always relying on hiring what's in the market, which may be, a limited candidate pool at any given time?
I do. And I think there's a few different strategies that companies and agencies, if you're working in government, public sector, or anything, you really need to think about what it is that you need versus what's nice to have. I see, and I've experienced myself, a lot of sort of pro forma hiring where you just post things the way that you've always done it. Bob left, we need to replace Bob, post Bob's job, without a lot of critical thinking to what do you really need for the job. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that the knowledge of your business, the understanding of your business, the knowledge of the culture and the relationships with people in your business are almost, if not as important as the actual subject matter knowledge for whatever area of cybersecurity that you're practicing in. And so the way that I look at it is somebody's going to have to learn something. Either an internal candidate is going to have to learn more subject matter information and become more of an expert in cybersecurity, or you hire an expert in cybersecurity and they have to come in and build the relationships and learn the company and learn how the company does business and how they make money and how the board views risks and so forth and so on. Somebody's going to have to learn something. I don't think that companies necessarily take that into account as much as they should, and they wind up shortchanging a lot of qualified or potentially qualified internal staff or people looking to make lateral or diagonal moves because they just go by the certifications or the years of experience in a particular field. And while that has value, I think they box themselves in with that. As a hiring leader, as a CISO, for example, I had a role that I loved very much. It was a great team. And if you guys are listening, I miss you guys up in Des Moines, Iowa, where, I parachuted in kind of as the new boss over a group. And I did some breakdowns, some demographics, just went to the Department of Labor statistics. And in that particular region, in that state, the whole southern half of that state, there was about 660,000 people in the workforce. And when you start doing the divisors between, okay, now of that 660,000 people, it's a big agriculture area, big biotech, a lot of insurance folks there, not a lot of technology folks there. It's just not a big tech market. So you start slicing and dicing. 2.4% of the people in that workforce are in technology. 1.2% of them are in cybersecurity. And then you look at the skills and things that you actually need, and there were 88 people. And I needed about 30 of them. And so it was very clear that you can't just float a job description and expect qualified resumes to just start flooding in. You really need to think thoughtfully about what do you need to buy. Like, what do you need to go to the market and buy? And then you need to go to other markets, potentially import them from a larger market, Chicago or Houston or whatever. Or you build. And then you set the expectation with your team and with management that you're going to build this talent. You're going to build these roles. And then the recruiters, I think, have a lot more latitude to search for the things that really matter in cybersecurity. The certifications you bring to the table, they help, but they don't really show that you're going to be good at doing the job. The things that matter the most, in my view, are things like intellectual curiosity, drive, ambition, the ability to learn, the willingness to learn, the genuine interest in the space. Like, what do you do for fun? If you're looking for an entry-level cybersecurity analyst and you find somebody that has their own GitHub repo and picks locks on the weekends, you should look at that person. They're naturally curious. They naturally want to see how things work. Like, those are the type of characteristics that really define the potential that you can build off of, and the subject matter stuff can be taught. Nobody is born knowing this stuff. Nobody comes out of the womb understanding DNS security or API security or any other type of security. We all have to learn it somewhere. So the hard part is sifting through the stuff that's easy to prove, like certifications and degrees, and getting to the soft stuff that's really much more important when it comes to building a longer term team. But that requires people to take a step back and really think about, what is it that I need in that role? What are the characteristics that I need in that role? And have the managerial courage to say, yep, it's going to take a year to build that and it's worth it. And at the end of that year, you'll probably find somebody that's less expensive to the company than the 20-year veteran that you went out to find. And you'll find somebody with the right soft skills and intelligence and curiosity, so that in a year, you'll have a great value and you will have given somebody the opportunity they were looking for. I think there's a real path forward if we start thinking about things more like that and less of just floating resumes with the job description that the guy left from. But I'm not seeing a lot of companies do that just yet. They're not being very thoughtful in how they hire.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you're posting the job of somebody that just left, and you're trying to find all of the same characteristics in somebody that's out there in the market, very, very low likelihood that that person actually exists outside of your company, because they didn't come in with 100% of the requirements that you probably put on that job description just now. They had to pick some things up along the way as well. I can imagine, though, like it all sounds very good in theory. Build people internally. Grow your own workforce. In your scenario, you said 30 people to hire. I can imagine there's a lot of kind of mid-level managers out there that are frustrated because they feel like they don't have the budget or the headcount to do what they feel like they need to do at this point in time, and thus they're kind of relegated to hiring reactively and just filling that seat with somebody that already knows what they're doing. They might say, I don't have the man hours on my team to train this person as much as I would like to. In my particular scenario, there's just no way that we can make it work. Do you think there's some scenarios in which it may not be practical to train somebody? Or do you think there's a way to kind of figure that out?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not advocating that that plan A for everybody is to build a young talent pool. That doesn't work sort of across the board. What I'm advocating, though, is being pragmatic about, what do I need somebody that can really jump in and hit the ground running today, versus what role or roles or areas of a particular role is it okay if somebody picks up over a little bit of time. If you do have a role that you need somebody to parachute in and bring those skills to bear immediately, two things to be aware of is, one, you're going to have to pay for that. Just straight get over the budget shock. You're going to have to pay for that, right? People that can do what you need don't come cheap, and there's not a lot of them. And two, you have to really wonder if that's going to be the right role for that person long term. If they can already do everything that you're looking for in a role, what are they going to grow into? Unless you're the hiring manager and you're looking for a successor, in which case you give them a path to your seat, whatever that is, risk officer, CIO, or whatever. But the people that can parachute in day one, they may not have a lot of growth opportunity for a particular role. So, just think about it. Are they going to be there for a year and you wind up having to try to hire that person again in 12 months? Or is this something that somebody that's got 75% of it is good enough for right now? And then they can grow into it. And actually, if you have the right people that you hire and then you listen to them, they'll actually tell you what to change in your organization. And that role will be different in 2 years. I think Steve Jobs said, we don't hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people and they tell us what we should do. And if you have that sort of mindset as well, keep an open mind and be a little bit flexible. The people that you bring in actually can help steer where you need to go. And I find that people from a diverse background are better at doing that than people that just rise through the classical security analyst 1, security analyst 2, SOC team lead, deputy CISO type path. That's just fine as a path if that's what someone wants to do. But if that's all you hire from, you wind up building a monoculture, and you really don't benefit from the diversity of experience and opinions and and backgrounds of people. Whereas if you're more flexible and you can hire from a variety of backgrounds, you wind up building a much more resilient team that's much more thoughtful and understands a lot more about business and the way business is done in your company than you would otherwise, just by sort of having this really static type of ladder that you try to hire into. So it's a non-trivial problem to solve, but I do think that giving it some thought really, like, it is a solvable problem. Over time you can fill these roles. You just may not do it the way that you first thought you were going to.
Yeah, and being able to adapt on the fly is extremely important, especially when the market changes so fast as I've personally seen this year. Hiring was hot and heavy last year, and then it seems like this whole year it's really slowed down. And I think a lot of people are going through the experience right now that they're having to do more with less. They're stressing their own teams more than they possibly would like to, and so there might be fears of people leaving. Retention becomes more difficult. And I think if you get into that situation, it's almost too late. Like you need to be proactive about building your team culture and making sure people are happy and building trust with people and making sure they feel comfortable coming to you with any issues. Any thoughts on that, building trust in a cohesive team culture to keep people sticking around for the long term before it's festered and become a problem?
Yeah, for sure. I think a few things come to mind. That's a broad, set of topics just on its own. But it's critically important that, for example, if you have someone in your team that's, say, technically very competent, but is very difficult to get along with, hard to work with, grumpy, things like that, your team members are watching you as the leader, and old saying, it's like with vendors and kids and dogs and everything else, goes with colleagues and employees. You get what you tolerate. They're looking at management all the time, and if you tolerate that sort of bad behavior, or not being a team player, just because somebody's technically very strong, the bad talent drives out the good every time, and that's a management problem. Training your employees is key. The people that you want to hire are intellectually curious. They're continually wanting to learn and grow. If you don't train them, they will leave. I had a debate with a CFO. This is probably 10 years ago now, almost. But at the time, the organization that I was working in had a 43% turnover rate. Very, very high turnover rate. Morale was terrible. Morale was in the toilet. And I was advocating for some very large increases in our training budget. And we had the sort of classic CISO, CFO conversation about, we're just going to train these people and they're going to leave. Do you see our turn? I mean, we're losing half of our staff every year, almost, with a 43% turnover rate. And we're just going to train them and they're going to leave. And my counterpoint to that was, what if we don't train them and they stay? Not only will we retain the people that we want to retain better if we actually invest in them and demonstrate that we care about them and their futures, and they're the CEO of their own career, but at the same time, we're going to make these resources accessible to those of you who want to take advantage of it. But if you have a bunch of untrained people, they're still the ones that are responsible for your critical systems and critical controls. That's not good for anybody. So when it comes to things like that, I do see companies from time to time being penny wise and pound foolish, and someone needs to advocate internally for, these are the things that are going to actually keep our staff. And it's a lot cheaper to pay somebody, say, $10,000 a year over the median market rate than it is to hire for that role 3 times in 18 months, right? It really does wind up saving money in the long run. The model that I've used a couple times previously is like the company I was talking about. Met with the leaders in HR and the CIO and others, kind of early on in that role, and said, what I really like is to build a team of about 30 that performs like a team of about 60, and that we pay like a team of about 40 to 45. And I think that kind of model really works well, where you're allowed to self-select the brightest, the most ambitious. They come in, they'll learn stuff quickly. You pay them well. That helps to make them sticky. They're invested in the company. They're growing. They're learning. They're supporting each other. And it's a great value for the company as well, because you could get the same amount of work product out of 60 sort of ham and eggers that clock in at 9 and leave at 5 and don't put any extra effort in, or you can get it out of 30 people that are really well motivated. Focusing on that type of thing and that long-term strategy really does pay off in the long run, but you need to have those conversations with the folks over the checkbook so they understand your strategy, they can buy off, and they've got confidence in you as a leader that you can actually deliver that. All of that stuff takes some time, but it's doable. And I think it's critical that you wind up doing that. Security talent's like development talent. It's not fungible. You can't just swap in one analyst for another analyst, and they're not robots. These are people with different skill sets and backgrounds. And understanding all of that is really, really important. It's the formula is simple, but it's not easy to pull off in practice. It takes some work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize how different hiring security people is from even IT. I recruited for IT before I broke into the security field myself and just kind of taught myself the security industry. And I was still operating off of the idea that, yeah, there's thousands and thousands of people out there with this skill set. I just got to make as many outbound dials as I did previously, recruiting in IT, and eventually I'm going to encounter the right person. Well, I quickly discovered that security is a much different animal. Recruiting in security is more qualitative. It's more focused on quality and relationships and consultative approach than it is volume, because these are very smart people in very specialized subdisciplines of security. And an IT auditor has a lot different worldview usually than a security engineer. And each of these roles has their own little culture, and obviously each of these roles has their own small pool of candidates as well that all know each other, and it's a very small industry. So I think anybody who's been a job seeker should be cognizant of that. You really can't afford to burn bridges, and keeping your own reputation intact is always super important. So you'd kind of touched on retention a little bit. What about some challenges that you've encountered over the years in hiring? Obviously, I could speak to this from a recruiting perspective, but it seems that you've been pretty open-minded in hiring, which is good. You've thought about kind of outside the box scenarios about building teams versus necessarily going out to the market, hiring somebody who's done this exact job before, which is the way most people hire in my experience. Yeah. But I would imagine in doing so and getting creative, you've encountered some challenges. Can you think of some that really stick out to you?
A couple. I mean, I've made the mistake a couple times, twice that immediately come to mind. I hope not more than that, of hiring really technically competent people that wind up being, for lack of a better term, a-holes, right? They interviewed well, they got along, everything looked great in the interview. And then as soon as they hit the ground, they started burning bridges and damaging relationships. And you got to nip that in the bud. It takes a long time for a security officer to build relationships and build bridges with, your development colleagues and folks in other parts of the business. You can't allow that to sabotage or derail just because you made a bad hire. The other things are you really have to be realistic and drive and have high expectations, but also give people a little bit of grace if they're coming in and trying to learn something new. They're not going to feel confident in their abilities just yet. They're going to feel like a little bit of a fish out of water. And you need to make sure that you're making it safe to come to you. If they've got a problem, they can ask you for help. If they've got bad news, something I say a lot in cyberspace is bad news ages like milk, not like wine. Bring bad news early and make it safe to come. I think one of the worst sayings that I ever hear managers say is kind of this Harvard Business School cliche: "Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions." That sounds really great. I understand the point of that is to try to just don't just delegate up with some issue you need me to solve. But if you stick to that too rigidly, you wind up setting the incentive for people not to bring you things that they can't solve themselves. They won't bring you issues that they need help, and then the problem just gets worse and worse and worse. So when somebody's coming new into a role, you need to give them some air cover, give them some grace to learn it, hold high expectations, but let them know it's okay if you don't get this right away. I completely, I believe in your ability, and they're going to have to move through the curve of competence. Only, confidence comes from competence. and there's no compression algorithm for experience. So at 3 years, this person will have been doing that for 3 years. And for the right role, it's totally worth it to wait. I find that longer term, if you have the luxury of a longer term horizon, the teams that you assemble from different groups within the organization will wind up being so diverse and valuable, and they'll know so much about the company, and they'll have the relationships that the security team can leverage with other areas in the business. It really winds up being a virtuous cycle. But you have to go into it with that view and understand it's going to take some time to build. And you need to set the expectations with the leadership team, above you and diagonally and whatever, that you're doing this on purpose. But over time, this is going to pay off, because it will. If you don't set those expectations and people don't know what you're doing or understand your strategy, it can look like, well, Pete just hires anybody. But Bob doesn't have any background in security, and he moved him over to be a firewall admin. I don't know what he's thinking. The plan may not be obvious if you don't communicate it. So I think it's obvious. You need to have a plan, communicate the plan, reiterate the plan. And that old saying about, if you tell a group something 7 times, half will say they never heard it. Right? You stay on message, set the goals appropriate for what you're looking people to grow into. And I really like the concept of shared goals across teams. 99 times out of 100, when I work with a company that has conflict between the infrastructure team and security, or development and infrastructure, whatever, 99 times out of 100, they have completely misaligned goals and objectives for management. And if leaders set conflicting goals, we are going to get conflict in the organization. A lot of this really comes down to management and leadership. It's less about the individual person that you're trying to put in the role, and more making sure that leadership is setting the right guardrails in place to get the desired result, right? But if you've got a young security analyst coming in, and you can have a shared goal with a senior developer over the application or the portfolio that person's in charge of governance for, you're going to get a much better result. They're going to build a relationship with that person or that team that they need. They're going to have aligned incentives. They're going to work together, and you're going to get a much better output than just as you said, the knee jerk, Bob's gone, hire another Bob. That's like, that's not even management. Like, you can automate that. I can create a bot to do that for you in 10 minutes. That's not leadership. So if your company is doing that, or if you as a hiring manager are doing that, take a step back and think about your plan, right? What is it that you're looking to get here, and do it with intention. I think you'll have much better results.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on one thing you said about giving employees a little bit of grace. I think that's one thing a lot of hiring managers don't do very well. There's a sense that if somebody's new in a role and they're not hacking it in the first 90 days, well, then maybe they're not the best fit for that role. Thinking of a situation where I recruited a guy, got him hired. He was about 6 months into it, and the hiring manager, after about 6 months, felt that he wasn't the best fit. That was beyond our guarantee period. So I said, I unfortunately, it's in our contract. I'm under no obligation to replace this person. Why don't you give him a second shot? He was really excited about the role. Seemed like a good fit to me. That person was given a second shot out of necessity, I guess. And turns out they're still there to this day. And it's been, 3 years, and he's been promoted since. So giving people a little bit of rope, I think, it can really pay off in the long run for sure. And you get a lot of loyalty out of people that you give a little extra latitude to, because they see that you took a chance on somebody, and they're more willing to slay dragons for you in the future. And it's so hard, I think, sometimes as a hiring manager, to develop that trust. We kind of live in a culture, it seems, where everybody looks at the company hierarchy, and everybody kind of feels like they're just a cog in the machine most of the time. And it's pretty rare that you get a team that's cohesive, and that, like you said, the leaders are true leaders and not just managers. Can you think of some things that might differentiate a manager from a leader in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of sort of the examples that we know from Harvard Business School and others. The tendencies and the behaviors to, leaders, for example, when they're giving credit they give credit to others, and when they're apportioning blame, they apportion blame to themselves. Those types of things. Managers just don't necessarily do that. That's the leadership really means, in my view, you don't assign people to do things that you don't want to do yourself. Your job is to support them and give them the tools and the resources that they need to do their job, and to take their feedback and listen to them, and what do they say that you need to do. Sometimes it's rare, but like in a crisis situation, sometimes leadership is a bunch of people telling them to do whatever the hell I tell them right now. Most of the time, that's not leadership. Most of the time, that's being a manager or a micromanager, and really listening to the folks and letting them solve the problems and bring solutions to the table and bring new ideas and making it safe for them to do so, like fostering that creative and collaborative environment. It goes back to what you said earlier about the soft skills. That's the stuff that we seem to be missing a lot, particularly in the technology and cybersecurity areas, are the human elements to this stuff, right? I don't care what business you're in the people business. And a lot of times we as technicians don't see that. As engineers, we don't see that. We enjoy the technology, a lot of introverts in our field, so maybe not the most social folks. And it's dangerous to just fall back into that and really just focus only on the subject matter or just doing what the boss tells me. I think it's a symptom of a toxic culture when you end a meeting and the people leave the meeting and they mutter about what we ought to do, but nobody brought that up in the conversation. Like there's something wrong there. It's a much better environment where people actually bring up ideas. And if something gets shot down, they don't get their feelings hurt over it because it's okay. It's a safe place. It's safe to bring out new ideas and think about things. But that's all. I think that's really the defining difference to me is the human aspect really separates leaders from managers. Anybody can manage. Anybody can give you a list of stuff to do. That helping people grow in their career, giving inspiration, giving freedom and latitude, that's the stuff that really separates a good leader. And you're right. That breeds loyalty. Everybody remembers the guy or girl who gave them their first shot. Everybody remembers that great boss that they'd love to work with again. And I wish every boss could be that way, but they're just not. I do think, though, also as you're a candidate, if you're looking to break into cybersecurity, find the right boss more than find the right role. The right boss is going to be much more impactful to you and to your career than a particular job as an analyst too, or whatever. You can learn from them and you find the right boss, and that will really, really help you set up for your success. So even if it's not the perfect role for you, you may get a lot more out of it longer term. So I ask managers to open their minds. I ask candidates to open their minds a little bit as well. Your career is probably a 30 to 40 year journey. Don't worry too much about the small stuff for the first 10 months of some role. Like if it's the right path for you long term, then jump into it. But you got to take that longer. Everybody needs to take a longer term view, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's a large driver, I think, of what we think of as the talent gap, is everybody's thinking about how do I solve the problems in front of my face? The hiring managers are looking at this gap on their team and they're like, okay, I got to fill that spot. I can't worry about anything else. That's the most immediate thing that needs my attention. The candidates, a lot of them have been through school or certifications and boot camps, and they have all this debt. And they've been told, make $100K in security. This is a great career path, and they have bills to pay. They need to get a job that pays well enough to where they can pay their bills and get a place and all that good stuff. But I just think the jobs aren't there. But often you'll also see some sense of entitlement. I've noticed where people feel like they're owed a remote job, or they feel that they can be picky when they have so much competition at that level. And the unfortunate reality is I think a lot of people are going out of work because their expectations are too high. And like you said, if you take that long-term view, you may take something that seems like it's a step back, or it seems like it's beneath you. You're too smart for this role, or whatever it may be. But if that's a stepping stone to something in the future, you just got to be able to make the dollars and cents work in the short term, which I think goes back to another plan or another point that I think a lot of people in the U.S. kind of live beyond their means. And if you don't do that, you're more able to have some flexibility in have a longer term focus versus making sure that, you can pay your bills in the immediate short term. What about on the hiring side? What do you think we often get wrong when it comes to, or what are we doing right when it comes to long-term focus versus short-term focus? Any thoughts there?
The biggest, I think there's a few things we do wrong. One, we make the hiring process too hard. And so, for example, just as a technologist, as a CTO, if I go to a website and I enter in the zip, and then I have to type in the city and the state in the same web form, I get annoyed. I gave you the zip. That tells you the city and the state. Why do you need me to type this in again? I think the hiring process is too hard. Uploading a resume and then retyping the resume into the field, that stuff's just ridiculous, right? And so the good candidates, the ones that the hiring managers really need to see, they're not interested. They've got a job already. They're just casually looking. Maybe this opened up in a region I was thinking about looking into, or it's close to my sister or whatever. They're never going to pursue it if you're not easy to work with. I think that's kind of an outcropping of the consumerization of IT. People stopped tolerating bad IT when consumer IT started getting really good. I think that's part of it. But also, I think that hiring managers and recruiters typically focus on what I would say are the wrong things. They focus on things that are easy to verify: certifications, degrees, grade point averages, things like that. Not that stuff doesn't have a place. But the analogy that I used with one of my recruiters, that when I was on a hiring sort of a hiring binge, I needed to bring in some talent. Is imagine like I'm buying a car. There's certain things that are really easy to verify. What color is the paint? What size are the tires? What size are the wheels? That kind of thing. The problem is that stuff's easy to fix. What I'm really buying is the running works. I want to know the engine, the transmission, the drivetrain, the chassis. What's the real running works of this car? And the same things with the people. I want to understand the potential of the person, their intellectual curiosity. Are they able to learn and willing to learn? Because if you're not able and willing to learn, you're going to be stale in cybersecurity in 2 years anyway. The last thing I want to do is hire somebody fresh off a CISSP that thinks they're done and they're not geeking out over this stuff on the weekends anymore. The people who are the ones that I want, and I don't care what industry certifications they have. I don't remember who posted it, but somebody just recently posted on LinkedIn about a ransomware gang. Looks like we're safe because the ransomware gang's only hiring people with 4-year degrees. It's like the criminals don't abide by any of these stupid restrictions we put on ourselves. Why are we shackling ourselves with this? If you identify the talent and then develop the talent, they're going to get it. But we're not doing that. We're hiring for things that are easy to verify, but not necessarily a measure of effectiveness, and certainly not a measure of long-term effectiveness. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Change what you're hiring for and look much more for the soft skills, the ambition, the drive, those types of things, rather than just pieces of paper from a third party, whether it's a college or a certifying body or whatever. Hire people that are doing bug bounty programs, capture the flag exercises. Like they're really in it. If that's what you want, I'd much rather have somebody with a high capture the flag ranking than a 4-year degree in cybersecurity. One of them really understands this stuff. Both of them might, but anybody can sit through classes and graduate with a degree. Not a lot of people can actually apply those skills in the real world and these kind of contests and things like that. So be creative with the stuff that you're looking for. I think we'd be better off with that.
Yeah, one of the things on the recruiting front, when we're kind of the first line of offense and going out to search for these candidates, you can't really tell as a recruiter if somebody has good soft skills just by looking at their LinkedIn profile or their resume. So I think we often default to these degrees or certs or years of experience to reach out to people because we have, we can't really assess those sort of things on paper. But then it becomes more important to screen for those things when you're actually talking to somebody. One yardstick that I've more often than not encountered as a measure of ability is years of experience. That seems to be the go-to. Has somebody been in incident response for at least 3 years of experience? That's what's required for a senior role or, mid-level role. we assign, I think, often these arbitrary ranges of years of experience to ranges of salary and ranges of job title. And like, I get it, we're trying to create some standardization even within a company if we can't do it across companies. So that's an ongoing challenge. But I think at the end of the day, there are other ways to assess skill. They may be more difficult than just using years of experience. That's, I think, an easy way to do it, which is why a lot of people default to that. But can you think of any other ways that we can, I guess, assess ability instead of defaulting to years of experience when we're interviewing or recruiting folks?
Yeah, and a lot of it I think has to do with the types of questions that you ask, the scenarios that you put people in. What are you asking about? If you're doing, for example, let's say you're doing a technical interview and it's really focused on the bits and bytes of something, you may not get very much insight into somebody's soft skills. I know that with me as the hiring manager working with my recruiters, I had to tell the recruiters that I'm looking for more of this sort of soft skill stuff, more of the human stuff. And then they were able to come up with some creative ways to sort of assess that in their conversations, whether their primary outreach mechanism was LinkedIn or email or some other method. It does take a little bit more work, but I think there are ways that you can intone towards that and have more questions about things like, what do you do for fun? Why do you find this space interesting? Tell me about your relationships and stuff like that, rather than just tell me about the certification or tell me about this ransomware gang or whatever it is, right? It'll let you put more focus on it. I don't think there's a silver bullet or a magic pill or a magic bullet, right? You're never going to know if somebody's really great to work with until you work with them. A lot of people can interview really well and not be that guy or girl that actually shows up to the job. I don't know how to solve for that problem, but I think just opening that door as a hiring leader, working with your recruiters, working together, you can figure out and at least move closer towards what you're looking to do and not get so boxed in.
Yeah, I think if you focus with a candidate, if you can uncover, and I do this a lot as a recruiter, I spend a lot of time talking to people about their motivators. Why would they be interested in considering a new role? And really digging into that. Often the first answer you get isn't necessarily revelatory. You really need to dig past the initial question, and you end up getting to some real gold there most of the time. And I think you get the best out of people when you get them speaking about something they're passionate about. So if you can uncover that in the interview or the recruiter screen, you can quickly understand what they actually care about. And that might be security, or it might not be. It may be they're more of a family person and they want to spend more time at home. And, the job is a way to do that. In which case, I would say that there probably is a place for that person in security. But I think oftentimes we kind of default to looking for the folks that live and breathe security and it's all they think about in their free time. And, it can kind of almost become all consuming. How do you feel about that? Like, do you think there's a place for people that don't necessarily want to do all the extra stuff in their off time in security? Do you think they can become effective and stay effective and stay up on the latest and greatest in security within working hours?
I think so. It's a matter of them, just put them in the right roles. What roles within your organization are okay for folks like that? If you've got folks that are, for example, working a ticket queue and they have kind of the same job every day, maybe they're doing, user access or architectural reviews or something. If they're doing this ongoing constant work, doing the same stuff, maybe that's okay. Not everybody has to be the super aggressive go-getter. But certainly for somebody looking to move into leadership and take on more and more responsibility, you're not going to get that if all you want to do is clock out at 5 and go home. That's okay. Not everybody has to march up the career path. And in fact, one of the things that I've done previously a couple of times in organizations is build career ladders such that they actually fork and bifurcate so that you don't have to follow that old pattern of individual contributor, team lead, manager, director, VP, whatever. If you want to stay an individual contributor, you can stay an individual contributor and have a parallel career path as an individual contributor so you don't have to get forced into management, for example. I think forcing people into jobs that they didn't necessarily want just because it's the only way they can make more money is a recipe for bad outcomes. And so putting somebody that doesn't want to do this stuff all the time and they're not super passionate about it, but they're good at what they do, they just have to accept that they're not going to get all the new opportunities because they're not the ones that are demonstrating they want more responsibility. That's okay. That can be fine as long as the expectations are set both ways. That, this guy over here, he ends every one-on-one with, what else can I help you with? What else can I help you with? Like, that guy's going places, and you clock out at 5 and don't want to go to any company events. It's totally okay. Just understand that you're not demonstrating the initiative that for some roles that you'll need to progress as rapidly as others. But if that's okay with you, that's totally fine.
That's a great point too about parallel paths. I think a lot of bad managers happen because there is no parallel path, and you end up forcing people into those roles where it's either up or out, and they don't know what else to do. It's like, well, I do want to make more money. I don't necessarily want to manage people, but I guess I will if I have to. And they end up in those roles.
Congratulations! You lose a great engineer and you get a terrible manager.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a great.
But at least you're paying more for it, so you got that going for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time, so I wanted to make sure we hit on one of my favorite topics that we discussed prior to this about how you are a Grand-CISO. Could you explain to our audience what that is and how you did it?
Yeah, it's probably one of the most rewarding parts of my career so far is sharing the tuition and the lessons learned and the battle scars that I've picked up over the last decades with others and helping them in their journeys. So I have mentored 5 CISOs from initial hire, mostly from interns, sometimes entry level developers and things. And they've gone on to become CISOs in their own right. And at least one of them has done the same. He hired a gentleman as an intern who is now a CISO in his own right. So I have spawned 5 CISOs, and at least one of those CISOs has spawned their own CISO. And so, if there is such a term as a Grand-CISO, I'm proud and honored to be in those ranks. So I think that's probably the most rewarding part of the journey is helping build new leaders. And I've paid the tuition, so if I can share the lessons, I'm more than happy. Nobody's got all the time to make the mistakes all themselves. So happy to share what's happened to me and, oh, this didn't go well, and let me tell you what I did wrong, and not have any ego about that because everybody makes mistakes, and that is very, very rewarding. And I still remember the guy, Steve Thomas, that gave me my break into InfoSec when I was looking for it. He was at AIG at the time, and I'll always be grateful. Even though we didn't work together that long, he actually resigned very quickly after I was hired. It was a Men in Black moment. I'm not hiring a partner, I'm training a replacement type thing. But everybody remembers where they got their break. And, folks in that first team that I built at AIG all those years ago, we're still in touch. It's been 20 years now. And we're still in touch. Whenever I'm back in North Carolina, I like to see the folks when I can. It's a great team. And some are retired, some are off doing other things, but those are the types of teams that I think is really rewarding to build. Now, it took a few years, but here it is. We've all gone separate ways, and they're all running their own groups now, or retired, or whatever, and we're still friends. Like, that is, I wish everybody had that relationship with all of their coworkers all the time. And it is possible, but it's just you don't just stumble into it. Like it takes a lot of thought and a lot of work for making it happen. But yeah, anyway, thank you for bringing up the Grand-CISO thing. That was that's something I'm really proud of.
My pleasure, and that's a great story. And obviously, the industry, as I had said before, is just so small. So you build those tight bonds and build those great teams and have that long-term focus. That's going to serve you well throughout the rest of your career. Like you said, everybody remembers who gave them a shot, and everybody remembers somebody that they hired that was amazing, as is evidence in your case as well. So, we're coming up on time, Chuck. Just one last question for you: is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Not talking about, but we should be. I am sure that there is. I think that one of the things we're not talking enough about is the CISO job just gets harder and harder and less attractive. I know a number of people that I've known for 10, 15, 20 years that now with the difficulty, with the chronic underfundedness and how behind the eight ball so many organizations are, these would be great security leaders. And they're saying, like, I don't know that I'll ever take another CISO role. It's just not worth it. Nobody wants to be the fall guy. Nobody wants to sign up for something that where CISO stands for career is suddenly over. And I think that some of the regulators, like the SEC, for example, when you look at some of the filings and documentation on the SolarWinds CISO case, they say, for example, the CISO was aware of control failures and didn't remediate them, and so he's going to be held personally liable. If I were still in the CISO chair, I probably would have spit my coffee out when I read that. Is that how you think this works? Is that how regulators think this works? The CISO says, go remediate this, and then it gets done. I think that we're going to see a dramatic increase in CISO pay to entice qualified people into those roles, which is going to not necessarily drive the right people that you want in those roles. And I think we're going to see a lot of issues with board level liability and accountability where they still aren't, they're worried about it, but they're not doing the things that they need to do. And so I was on a recent panel with a bunch of bank directors, and somebody asked for, how do I know if my company is a bunch of board directors? How do I know if my company takes security seriously? And I said, well, here's the question. Ask your CISO, did the CEO of this company or this bank, did they do their own security awareness training, or did they delegate it to their executive assistant? That right there, one question is a litmus test for the culture of that organization. If the CEO can't be bothered to do his or her own security awareness training, no way I'd take that job. You're not serious about this. You think this is somebody else's problem. You think this is technology. I think we're going to see a big disruption in the top of the house with security leadership in the next couple of years. I think virtual CISO firms are well positioned to really expand, but companies are going to be in a bad spot when they try to blame a third party for their own risk tolerance and their own risk management. So I don't see a lot of conversation about that. I see a lot of gnashing of teeth on LinkedIn about, oh my gosh, look what's happening here. But the people who are complaining are not the board members and the CEOs and CFOs that are actually going to need to make substantive changes in the organization. That's still coming. I think we'll see it in the next year or two, but it hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, and the buck's got to stop somewhere. It's got to be somebody's butt at the end of the day. You would hope that it's spread around a little bit and doesn't all fall on a single person, but we'll certainly see how that evolves. That's a great point, Chuck, and thanks for being a guest. If people want to find you online, what's the best way to do so?
So wib.com, WIB.com, that is my company, API Security. It is a fascinating space, having a great time doing what we're doing. And my LinkedIn profile as well. That's the only social media that I use. I don't have any other social media if you're in security, obvious reasons.
It's a good one to have. Well, thanks for your time, Chuck. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks, Pete.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.